Okay, so this is the Bible study for Genesis chapter 29, verses 1 through 30. And the text for today says, Then Jacob continued on his journey and came to the land of the eastern peoples. There he saw a well in the open country with 3 flocks of sheep lying near it, because the flocks were watered from that well. The stone over the mouth of the well was large. When all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone away from the well's mouth and water the sheep. Then they would return the stone to its place over the mouth of the well. Jacob asked the shepherds, My brothers, where are you from? We're from Haran, they replied. He said to them, Do you know Laban, Nahor's grandson? Yes, we know him, they answered. Then Jacob said, Is he well? Yes, he is, they said, and here comes his daughter Rachel with the sheep. Look, he said, the sun is still high. It is not time for the flocks to be gathered. Water the sheep and take them back to pasture. We can't, they replied, until the flocks are gathered and the stone has been rolled away from the mouth of the well. Then we will water the sheep. While he was still talking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherd. When Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of his uncle Laban's sheep, he went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well and watered his uncle's sheep. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and began to weep aloud. He had told Rachel that he was a relative of her father and a son of Rebekah, so she ran and told her father. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he hurried to meet him. He embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his home. And there Jacob told him all these things. Then Laban said to him, You are my own flesh and blood. After Jacob had stayed with him for a whole month, Laban said to him, Just because you are a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me, what your wages should be. Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Jacob was in love with Rachel and said, I'll work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter Rachel. Laban said, It is better I give her to you than to some other man. Stay here with me. So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, Give me my wife. My time is completed, and I want to make love to her. So Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast. But when evening came, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and Jacob made love to her. And Laban gave his servant Zilpah to his daughter as her attendant. When morning came, there was Leah. So Jacob said to Laban, What is it you have done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me? Laban replied, It is not our custom to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Finish this daughter's bridal week, then we will give you the younger one also in return for another 7 years of work. And Jacob did so. He finished the week with Leah, and then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her attendant. Jacob made love to Rachel also, and his love for Rachel was greater than his love for Leah, and he worked for Laban another 7 years. Well, I think that story leaves us with all sorts of questions. Some of them feel like they're not answered here, and maybe will be answered in the coming week's text, but we can only do so much in a week, so here we are. Remember that you can download a PDF copy of this Bible study at www.abqnaz.org/alive so that you can follow along with us as we study this text. Number 1 says, What did we learn about in last week's Bible study or in the last Bible study? So last week we were talking about Jacob's journey, and on his journey he came to Bethel and lay his head down on a stone and had a dream that that there was a stairway extending from the earth into heaven, and angels were coming and going on the stairway, and the Lord was standing at the top of it. And Jacob woke up and said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it." And so then he set this up sort of as a place of worship. He set up a pillar, a monument, and anointed it with oil, designating it a place where God's presence was. And that's pretty much the story. So that was a pretty significant story on the path. But we know that the path was always leading to Haran, where Jacob would find a wife from his father's family and his mother's family. So number two, what happens now, according to 29, 1 through 3? Jacob continued on his journey and came to the land of the eastern peoples. Now, we don't know what that means, but apparently he came close enough to Haran that he found people of Haran. And so there he is. B, he saw a well in open country with 3 flocks of sheep lying near it because the flocks were watered from that well. Yes. C, the stone over the mouth of the well was large. Yes. D, when all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone away from the well's mouth and water the sheep. Yes. E, then they would return the stone to its place at the mouth of the well. So it's interesting, we find out sort of the whole story of how these flocks are watered, what the proper procedure is, what they would do. Seems like this is a regular thing that they do. And so the sheep know, and they all kind of meet there. Maybe the stone was big enough that it required more than one shepherd. And so, because it required more than one shepherd, then they all had to gather there together, and they worked together to get the well open and then get it resealed. It doesn't really tell us why they did this or what the significance of all of this was. We do know that they were pretty firm on this is what we do, and so we're not going to change it up just because you showed up today. Because Jacob sort of, well, we'll get into that. He suggests something other than what their regular custom was. Number 3, what was the conversation that Jacob had with these men in verses 4 through 8? A, Jacob asked where the men were from, and they said they were from Haran. Yes. B, Jacob asked if they knew Laban, Nahor's grandson, and they said, yes, we know him. C, Jacob asked if he was well, and they said, yes, he is. Here comes his daughter Rachel with the sheep. Yes, that happened. D, Jacob said, look, the sun is still high. It is not time for the sheep to be gathered. Water the sheep and take them back to pasture. But they replied, we can't. So there's this sense that they probably gathered them for the night, and yet they are all gathering here in the same place to be watered. And so Jacob, his understanding of what should be is they probably shouldn't be all gathered here. Maybe that made them sitting ducks and easy prey for a wild animal that would come. Maybe they're better off scattered until it comes the night where we need to gather around and sort of protect them. I don't know. When I read this, my first thought was Jacob hears that Rachel, daughter of Laban, is coming, and she's here, and he's like, I don't know, like it sounds silly. It feels kind of like a bro code thing. Dude, can you give me a few minutes alone with her? Can you guys, why don't you guys go ahead and water the sheep now and then just take them out, scatter, go somewhere else, and I'll be here when she gets here, and I can have sort of a private discussion with her. I don't know that that's what, but it kind of feels like that to me. Like guys, let's change it up today. Why don't you guys water your sheep and head out? I'll take care of Rachel's sheep. We'll make sure they get watered. There's no sense in everybody gathering at once. And then of course he rolls the stone away to water her sheep. So if this was something that took multiple shepherds, or some of the shepherds weren't strong enough to roll the stone away by themselves, perhaps Rachel herself, because she was Well, I better not say that in 2025 or I'm in trouble. But anyway, maybe she just wasn't strong enough to move. But anyway, so they were waiting for her and they were all going to get together. But then, I don't know, maybe Jacob wanted to show how strong he was. He could roll this away for her all by himself. I don't know what's going on here, but it does seem like he's kind of trying to set it up. Let's set this up. Let's get the mood right. Let's get the situation right. Um, we don't do that, do we? We don't create a situation that'll make it easier. I'm so backward and introverted, and I've gotten better at speaking in front of people. But when I asked my wife out on a date for the first time, I was so backward. I multiple times banging my head on the steering wheel because I was at church and I saw her and I didn't ask her out, right? And that's where I was. So then I like tried to work it. So maybe I'm just kind of sort of projecting myself. I tried to work it where we'd have a college and career event at my house, so I'm on my home turf, and now maybe I can talk to her a little. And then she didn't even come. She was busy that night. She didn't come. So um I don't know. Maybe that's what Jacob was thinking. Let me work this out. I got a plan. But these guys weren't having it. They weren't having the plan. They said, no, that's not how we do it. This is how we do it. I don't know if there's any spiritual, truth in there. I mean, there's so much detail in this story, and it sort of makes you think, why is this here? Maybe that there's something here that's supposed to say something to us, but I don't really see it in this part at least. Um, there's plenty left to go in this story though. Number four, what happened in 29, 9 through 14a? While he was still talking to the men, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherd. B, when Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of his uncle Laban, and Laban's sheep, he went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well and watered his uncle's sheep. That's true. C, Jacob kissed Rachel and began to weep aloud. Now, I think this is sort of a greeting kiss, a family greeting, not he just randomly ran up and awkwardly kissed her in some sort of romantic way. But anyway, it seems like he was glad to see somebody that he had set out to find his family, and he had found his family. D. He told Rachel that he was a relative of her father and a son of Rebekah, and she ran and told her father. And then E. Laban hurried to meet Jacob and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his home. See, this is the greeting. Number five, what happened in 29:14b through 15? So we have, after Jacob had stayed with him a whole month, Laban said to him, "Just because you are a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be." So it's crazy because he came to get a wife. We know that he came to get a wife, but it says that when he went, he told him all these things. That's in verse 13. But it doesn't tell us what he told him. In the end, he lives with him for a month, and Laban's like, what do you want me to pay you for helping out with our flocks? And so there's a sense that Jacob's here. He's staying now with his family, but he hasn't, up to this point, it doesn't seem like he's made his intentions or his desire known. So here he is for a month working for him until Laban says, what am I going to pay you? And so the second part says, how did Jacob respond in 16 through 18? He said, well, we find out that Rachel was pretty and Leah had weak eyes. And so Jacob was in love with Rachel, so that's all the pre. Then his answer was, I'll work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter, Rachel. So his response was, I'll work for you not just for a month, but for 7 years in return for your younger daughter, Rachel, to be my wife. And then what was Laban's response according to 29, 19, and 20? He says, it's better that I give her to you than to another man. Stay here with me. So Jacob served. So he was like, yeah, I'd rather she marry you than some random guy off the street. You seem like a good kid. Your family, I know your parents. I know this is going to be okay. So he approves and he says, yes, this is what we're going to do. 7 years, you work for me, and you can marry Rachel. He agreed to that. Number six, what happened at the end of 7 years, according to 29, 21 through 30? Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife. My time is completed and I want to make love to her. Um, so, yeah, I mean, that's bold and forward. And so 7 years. Let me just say, though, I feel like here is a spiritually significant moment. He worked 7 years for her to become his wife. And then he said, now give me my wife and let me make love to her. I just want to process that with you. That the 7 years came first, the 7 years of work. They didn't just, start, living as husband and wife immediately. So 7 years he worked for. Let me just say this. He valued her. It tells us that it was like days because he was so in love with her that it didn't feel like that long to him, because it was nothing compared to what he was going to receive when he received his wife. And I want to just say that part of our problem in our modern culture is we don't value our spouses that way. We don't value our men. We don't value our wives that way. And it's really clear to me that we don't value them when we take them home, on the first night at the club or whatever. It's really clear to me that we don't value them when we can't wait for them. When we would um, sort of devalue them or disrespect them um, by by being intimate with them before we've made a commitment. And so let me just throw that out there that the example of this, I'm not suggesting 7 year engagements. I'm just, what I am saying is that she was valuable to Jacob and she was worth every moment of 7 years of work. And the fact that we can't wait months or whatever it is through an engagement to be married, the fact that we're unwilling to commit, the fact that we're unwilling to do anything hard, um, like be abstinent. Um, in order to sort of win the heart of our spouse and earn um, you know the respect and the love of someone. Yeah, we've got a problem. We've got a real problem. There's a significant difference between Jacob's mindset about marriage and ours. And I'm not saying we need to work 7 years for our spouses, but yeah, can we at least go partway there? Can we at least get to the place where we're willing to value them again? B. Laban threw a party, a wedding feast, but when evening came, he gave Jacob Leah instead of Rachel. So I don't know exactly how this works. Um, you know, apparently not too many lamps. Maybe Jacob's in there in the dark when she arrives. But in the morning, when morning came, Jacob realized it was Leah and not Rachel and asked Laban what he had done to him. So at this point, he's already consummated the marriage. He's already been married to her. and it's the wrong woman, so you don't just switch that out. You don't just like that's not an easy fix. And so that's another difference between today and then. um, Laban responded that it was not his custom to give away the younger daughter before the older, and he offered Rachel to Jacob for another 7 years of work. So, prior to this, Laban has generally been considered a a positive character in the story. Um, you know, um, he was instrumental when Rebecca married Isaac. But now we go back and it makes us sort of double check and second guess um, when they were like, yeah, Rebecca can be married to Isaac, but then they were like, but let her stay here for a while. Maybe Laban has had this kind of streak in him the whole time. Maybe there was something to that. But Laban agreed to Rachel, and now he's got excuses. Now he says, "Well, you got to give the older away first." Well, what you I guess for this 7 years you've been having trouble giving her away because of her weak eyes or what? So now Jacob is married to Leah, and he says, "But you can have Rachel too at the end of this week." As long as you work for me for another 7 years. So now all of a sudden he's working for 14 years for the bride that he had originally already worked for 7 years to marry. But he did it. Jacob was married to Rachel at the end of the bridal week with Leah, and then he worked for Laban another 7 years. So number 7 says, what can we learn from this story? Don't trust Laban. So this man, I really didn't want to stop in the middle of the story because I do believe there's some things that as we go along in the story that God protects and blesses Jacob. And despite what Laban has done, God finds a way to make sure that Jacob is taken care of, and that this unfair thing, he's given the opportunity to make things right. Um, we might argue that Jacob resorted to his own sort of trickery at some point. When we get there, we'll talk about that. Um, which maybe isn't out of character for Jacob, given what we know with Jacob and Esau. But it's interesting because it's really hard to find this spiritual truth. Jacob seems to have in this story done everything right up to now, and yet he was cheated. um, he was cheated out of 7 years of his life, cheated out of um, maybe the bride that he eventually got the bride, but now he's got Leah, and now he's got the situation where he's married to sisters, and he loves one more than the other, and that never goes well. So we have this situation where Jacob is in a position where things are not right. He's been treated wrongly. But how does he respond? He submits. He works for the other 7 years. He values Rachel enough that he does what he needs to get Rachel. He could have walked off and just taken Leah, but he loved Rachel, and so he worked the other 7 years. He didn't fight Laban. He didn't kill Laban. He didn't do all the things that probably we would have been tempted to think about doing. Um, and But in the end, God provides ways, I believe, for Jacob to be blessed. And I think for me, uh, we don't see it in this part of the text yet, but an assurance that God has not forgotten, God has not ignored, God doesn't, God is not allowing injustice to reign in the long term. But God will be there, is really important. So, um, it's tough to end the story here and then wait for the next part of the story. But I do believe we can be confident that God has not forgotten Jacob.